The Imperial Japanese Army had one of the most rigid, brutal, and fascinating rank structure in all of World War II. From a nobody private who could be legally slapped by anyone above him, all the way up to a field marshal, personally appointed by the Emperor himself. Today, we are going through every single rank, from the absolute bottom to the very top. Let's get into it. We start at the very bottom with the Nitohei, the private second class. This was the entry rank for every fresh recruit entering the Imperial Japanese Army, with no exceptions. These men had just completed their initial induction and were considered the lowest of the low in every possible way. The Imperial Japanese Army practiced a brutal internal discipline system known as taibatsu, which allowed senior soldiers to physically strike junior ones, and at this rank, you were junior to almost everyone. A Nitohei was assigned the most dangerous, most exhausting, and most thankless tasks the army had to offer. Promotion out of this rank came after just a few months of service, if you survived, of course.
Next, we have the Nitohei, the private first class. One small step upward, but psychologically it mattered. This soldier had completed basic military training and demonstrated the minimum acceptable level of competence required by the army. He was still a frontline soldier, carrying out combat, logistics, and support duties without any real authority over others. The only meaningful perk was that he was no longer the absolute bottom of the food chain, and someone else was now absorbing the worst of the physical discipline. Promotion to this rank typically came after several months of satisfactory service in the field or garrison. Let's continue with the Jotohei, the superior private, the highest rank in the enlisted tier. This was a seasoned soldier who had proven his worth through sustained performance and time in service. A Jotohei could informally assist non-commissioned officers in managing newer soldiers, which gave him a small but real taste of authority. He was respected within the enlisted ranks and was considered a reliable fighting man. Think of him as the guy who has seen enough to know exactly how bad things can get and has kept going anyway. This rank was the last stop before crossing into the non-commissioned officer tier.
Now we enter leadership territory. These were the men who actually made the army function day to day. We have the Gocho, the corporal, and this is where real authority begins. The Gocho was the first non-commissioned officer rank in the Imperial Japanese Army, and it was a significant step up from anything in the enlisted tier. He led small fire teams in combat and was directly responsible for the discipline and performance of the men under him. Selection for this rank required demonstrated leadership ability, not just time served. The Gocho was the first point of contact between raw enlisted soldiers and actual military leadership. Small rank, serious responsibility.
Next, we have the Gunso, the sergeant, and this one is important. The Gunso typically commanded a squad, known as a buntai, made up of roughly 8 to 13 soldiers. These were battle-hardened, experienced non-commissioned officers who formed the operational backbone of the Imperial Japanese infantry. They were responsible for training, combat effectiveness, and the day-to-day discipline of their squad in the field. A skilled Gunso could mean the difference between a squad that functioned under fire and one that collapsed. Armies rise and fall on their sergeants, and the Imperial Japanese Army was no exception.
Let's continue with the Socho, the Sergeant Major, the highest non-commissioned officer rank in the entire Imperial Japanese Army. The Socho was a senior advisor to officers at the company level, handling administration, discipline, and operational readiness with decades of hard-earned experience. He was deeply respected by enlisted men and officers alike, and served as the critical bridge between the two worlds. A Socho had seen it all, done it all, and had very little patience for nonsense from anyone. He managed the practical reality of running a military unit in ways that no officer fresh from an academy could.
If the Gunso was the backbone, the Socho was the spine.
We have the Jun'i, the warrant officer, an interesting rank that sat in a unique space between non-commissioned officers and fully commissioned officers. The Jun'i possessed specialized technical or operational expertise that set him clearly apart from standard NCOs. He could command small units or fill critical specialist roles within a larger formation, depending on his area of expertise. The rank was formalized more firmly in the later stages of World War II, as the army expanded and required more technically qualified personnel at the mid-level. He was addressed with greater formality than any NCO, but did not carry the full weight of a commissioned officer's authority. Somewhere in between, and genuinely valuable because of it.
Next, we have the Minarai Shikan, the officer candidate. Not yet a commissioned officer, but almost there. These candidates had either graduated from one of the Imperial Japanese Army's officer training institutions, or were being fast-tracked through accelerated programs during the later war years when officer losses became severe. They served within active units under the supervision of experienced officers, applying their classroom training to real operational conditions. The expectations were extremely high. Physical, tactical, and mental performance were all scrutinized continuously. This rank was the final gateway before receiving a formal commission. Pass through here, and you became a real officer. Fail? Well, that was not an acceptable option.
The first level of fully commissioned officers. These men led from the front, sometimes fatally so. Let's continue with the Shoi, the second lieutenant, the lowest commissioned officer rank in the Imperial Japanese Army. A Shoi typically commanded a platoon, known as a shotai, of approximately 30 to 50 soldiers. Many Shoi were young graduates of the Imperial Japanese Army Academy, the Rikugun Shikan Gakko, filled with idealism, discipline, and the expectation that they would lead their men directly into combat. During the later stages of World War II, rapid officer training programs produced large numbers of Shoi to replace the devastating losses suffered across the Pacific. They were expected to lead from the absolute front, and the casualty rates among Shoi reflected exactly that expectation. Inspiring, and also quite grim.
We have the Chui, the first lieutenant, a more experienced officer who had survived his time as a Shoi and earned his additional stripe. The Chui often served as platoon commander with greater operational confidence, or stepped into the role of company executive officer, serving as second in command of a Chutai. He was trusted with more administrative and tactical responsibilities than a second lieutenant, and his experience made him genuinely valuable in the field. Promotion from Shoi to Chui typically came after 2 to 3 years of commission service and satisfactory performance. At this level, an officer was no longer learning on the job. He was expected to already know the job. Next we have the Tai, the captain, and this was one of the most critical command positions in the entire army. A Tai commanded a company, the Chutai, which typically comprised between 100 and 200 soldiers, depending on its type and wartime losses. The Tai was personally responsible for the tactical performance, supply chain, discipline, and fighting morale of every single one of those men. Some of the most celebrated and decorated combat leaders in the entire Imperial Japanese Army held the rank of Tai during their most defining engagements. A competent Tai was not just useful, he was absolutely essential to tactical success at the ground level. A bad one was a catastrophe waiting to happen. Here, the transition from pure tactical command to operational and administrative authority begins. Let's continue with the Shosa, the Major, the entry point into field-grade officer territory. A Shosa typically served as a battalion executive officer, as a staff officer at regimental headquarters, or in some cases commanded a battalion, the Daitai. of roughly 500 to 1,000 men. Reaching this rank required years of demonstrated performance across multiple assignments and command positions. The Shosar was beginning the transition from a hands-on tactical leader to an officer who shaped operations from a command and staff perspective. The paperwork increased dramatically. The personal combat exposure slightly less so, though in the Imperial Japanese Army, that was never a guarantee.
We have the Chusa, the lieutenant colonel, one of the most operationally significant ranks in the regimental structure. The Chusa was the primary battalion commander, leading a Daitai in combat and coordinating with regimental headquarters. These were senior field officers with extensive operational experience across multiple theaters of war. A Chusa commanding a battalion in heavy combat bore direct responsibility for hundreds of lives and the outcome of engagements that could affect much larger operations. They also served in staff positions at divisional level, where their experience shaped operational planning far above their direct command. No longer young officers learning the trade, these men were the trade. Next we have the Taisa, the colonel, the commander of a regiment, the Rentai, which was the primary large-scale tactical and administrative unit of the Imperial Japanese Army. A regiment typically comprised around 3,000 soldiers, organized into multiple battalions. The Taisa had spent decades in service, rising through every level of command to reach this position. His decisions directly shaped the course of engagements involving thousands of soldiers, and his relationship with divisional command determined how effectively his regiment was employed. Reaching the rank of Taisa was the culmination of an entire military career for most officers. Going further required something more than just competence. Let's continue with the Shosho, the Major General, the lowest general officer rank, and the point at which an officer stepped fully into strategic operational command. A Shosho typically commanded a brigade, the Ryodan, or served as a senior staff officer at divisional headquarters. At this level, an officer was no longer primarily a tactical leader. He was a planner, a coordinator, a decision-maker whose choices affected thousands of men across entire operational areas. Reaching this rank required not just military competence, but political awareness, logistical understanding, and the ability to operate effectively within the complex hierarchy of the Imperial Japanese command structure. Decades of perfect service, and still not at the top.
We have the Chujo, the Lieutenant General, one of the most powerful and consequential ranks in the entire army. A Chujo typically commanded a division, the Shidan, comprising anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000 soldiers, depending on its type and wartime strength. The division was the primary large-scale operational formation of the Imperial Japanese Army, and its commander shaped engagements at a level that directly influenced entire campaigns. One of the most famous officers to hold this rank was Tomoyuki Yamashita, when he commanded the conquest of Malaya and Singapore in 1941 and 1942, widely considered one of the most tactically decisive campaigns of the entire war. The Chujo was not just a commander, he was a force of operational nature. Next, we have the Taisho, the general, among the absolute highest active operational ranks in the Imperial Japanese Army. A Taisho commanded an army, the gun, or in some cases an army group, coordinating multiple divisions across vast operational theaters. Only the most senior, most accomplished, and, it must be said, most politically connected officers in the entire military establishment ever reached this rank. Perhaps the most internationally recognized Taisho of World War II was Hideki Tojo, who served simultaneously as Army General and Prime Minister of Japan during much of the conflict, concentrating an extraordinary level of military and governmental authority in a single man. The Taisho represented the absolute pinnacle of active command authority in the Imperial Japanese Army. And finally, we arrive at the Gensui, the Field Marshal. And this was not simply a promotable rank. This was an imperial distinction of the absolute highest order, personally conferred by the Emperor of Japan himself upon generals of exceptional,
career-defining service and achievement. It was not awarded through the normal promotion system. It was not earned through seniority alone. The Gensui received a ceremonial marshal's baton and was considered, in the most literal sense, a personal extension of the emperor's military authority. During the World War II era, the distinction was held by a very small number of officers, including Hisaichi Terauchi and Hajime Sugiyama. This was not a rank, this was a statement that you had served the empire at a level that placed you beyond the ordinary hierarchy entirely, the top of the top, the absolute ceiling of the entire Imperial Japanese military structure.